The death this week of Gordon Lightfoot, the iconic Canadian folk singer, has vividly illustrated the power of music in our lives. Writing in online obituaries, fans celebrated the emotional connection they have with his music. So deeply rooted in my young, searching being, wrote one, while another remembered, for all my life, Gordon Lightfoot's songs have been a steady anchor for my inner sadnesses. Those inner sadnesses are powerfully expressed through Lightfoot's hit song, Clouds of Loneliness. What can you do? You'll never win. Where will you go when night closes in? Where will it lead? Will it ever end? Where will it stop? Losing a friend isn't what we had in mind exactly. All we need is a friend, I guess, with my midnight star to guide through clouds of loneliness. The song captures the desolation of feeling lonely. And while the lyrics may now be over 2 decades old, the emptiness expressed in this song has not healed. The statistics are blunt and appalling. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, and greater than that associated with obesity and physical inactivity. The risk of every cause of death, including heart disease, cancer, stroke, renal failure, all these increase from isolation. In a recent survey, 6 in 10 Canadians said they would like their friends and family to spend more time with them. And 1 in 4 fall into the category described as desolate. So when you next feel lonely, start perhaps to remember you're not alone. We think sometimes that this is a problem that worsens with age, but recent research suggests young people in Canada are experiencing loneliness more frequently than any other age group. Among Canadians aged 15 to 24, nearly 1 in 4 said they always or often felt lonely. A sense of abject loneliness, despite being surrounded by people, of the loneliness that emerges when we don't feel that we belong, was vividly illustrated for me by the tragic experience of a colleague of mine whose son Luke died in his first semester at university. Luke's death has been formally listed as suicide, a fatal combination of high levels of alcohol and the antidepressants his family didn't know he was taking. Because this engaging, outgoing, lively young man was increasingly troubled and ultimately overwhelmed by the initiation rites of his fraternity, what friends have described as a long and cruel pledging process, also known as hazing. Fraternity life was a big part of Luke's university experience. He was excited to join, yet as he told his friends, he increasingly found the hazing rituals impossible to endure. He wanted to belong, said Luke's mom, and we believe that the rituals that were part of his fraternity had dangerous components that added to his adverse mental and physical health. That need to belong ultimately pushed Luke to breaking point. A victim of feeling isolated and out of place in an environment where he was trying to fit in. Our reading this morning from the first letter of Peter alludes to an understanding of this depth of loneliness and rejection. Peter is writing to the exiles of the dispersion, Christian believers who were scattered and isolated throughout the Roman provinces in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. At the end of our passage, we hear him say, "Once you were not a people." But this can also be translated as, "Once you were no people." No people. People of nothing and nobody, with no history, no roots, no community. No people. Marginalized and isolated, ignored by the world, neither Roman nor Jew, and drifting on the edge of society. They were nobodies belonging to no one in particular and going nowhere special in life. They were the Lukes of their world, struggling to fit into a strange and threatening community. And as no people, Peter's audience have a powerful, poignant counterpart, Jesus, who Peter describes as the stone that the builders rejected, reminding his listeners that Jesus too knew rejection, both during his lifetime and in his final days. Peter alludes to this further, repeatedly describing Jesus as the stone that made others stumble and fall. And there is a wistful irony here, because as he makes this comparison, Peter is quoting from the Psalms, Psalm 118 to be exact. The stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Now, if you didn't immediately place the reference, you're not alone. This verse is an obscure line from a relatively unremarkable psalm that lingers in the background, while Psalm 23 or 91 or even Psalm 121 take all the attention. So it might surprise you to learn that this verse is the most frequently quoted Old Testament verse in the New Testament. Not a line from Isaiah or Jeremiah or any of the famous Psalms, but Psalm 118. Something in this lonely verse about a rejected stone connected with the apostles. Perhaps it had connected with Jesus during his ministry, and it became for them the very essence of Jesus and his gospel. Mercifully, triumphantly, Peter's letter does not end there. Indeed, as Jesus' gospel does not leave his followers lost and lonely either. Once you were no people, but now you are God's people, a chosen people, chosen and precious. Isolation, rejection, loneliness. This is not the way God wants things to be. And while Jesus, as rejected, can understand this pain, the resurrected Jesus, merciful and accepting, erases this pain and embraces us into belonging. This is the overarching message of 1 Peter, what it means to belong to Christ and to belong to the community of Christ's followers. So as Peter writes, he expands on the core dimensions of being God's people, reinvigorating the image of Jesus as a stone, from a rejected stumbling block to the foundation of renewed life, a cornerstone, chosen and precious. The passage then evokes the image of building, of coming together and making something bigger than ourselves. It is a call to community, to belonging. I'm reminded here of the dry stone walls found throughout many parts of Europe, which are renowned for their durability, and most of which are centuries old. It takes all shapes and sizes of stones to build a dry stone wall. Large foundational stones set at the base, and the size of the stone gets smaller as the wall rises. Flat and wide stones, known as through stones, hold the structure together and increase its strength, while smaller stones fill the gaps. All shapes and sizes are needed, so everyone is included, and it creates a wall with lasting strength, where the endurance of the collective power of each stone exceeds their individual function. It is a powerful representation of the community we are called to participate in, and it is a wonderful image of belonging. But 1 Peter takes the comparison further still and talks of living stones to describe both Christ and his followers. It's an incongruous image for us. I mean, everyone knows stones are solid and unmoving. But in biblical times, objects such as stones or rocks that were seen as firmly rooted in the earth were often described as living. So it's an image of groundedness and growth, of flourishing from a place of strength, of reaching out and building in. It is perhaps the perfect representation of what it means to be church. And so the picture diversifies to not only include church as a building made of static stones, but church as belonging, made up of us as living stones that build space to celebrate the presence of God and that take that sacred space and offer it to others. Being a living stone is a calling that taps into who we are and where we are, the solid essence of us. And then gently, softly, this calling encourages us to grow and support others. It doesn't ask us to stretch beyond ourselves, just as stones don't stretch. But nevertheless, we can support others, give life to others, just as these stones in our sermon image today are doing, giving life and place to the mosses that grow on their surface. And being a living stone, working with who we are and where we are, can help address our deep need to heal loneliness, helping others, and in doing so, helping ourselves. Dr. Vivek Murthy, Surgeon General of the United States, has recently featured on the On Being podcast, and he talks openly about a time when he struggled with loneliness himself. He had lost a prestigious job and suddenly found himself on the outside of his work community where he had previously found meaning, and as a result sunk into a deep abyss of loneliness for a long time. And then he reconnected with a friend who confronted him with some tough love. "Vivek," she said, "you know what your problem is? Your problem is not that you don't have friends. Your problem is you're not experiencing friendships. She continued, if you called any of those people you've lost touch with, they'd be more than happy to talk to you, much happier than you realize. So she challenged him. You have to get over your shame and your sense of embarrassment at not being in touch and just reach out. And you'll find that people are also hungry for human connection. And it doesn't need to take long. 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes a day. Imagine what we could do if every day we each tried to reach out to just one person to check in and see how they're doing. Even if we only succeeded every other day, think what waves of connection we could create. And this ties to the second way we can heal our loneliness, which is to find opportunities to serve others. Now, this can seem counterintuitive. You might think, if I'm lonely, don't I need somebody to help me? Why am I helping somebody else? But as Murphy explains, when we help each other, we not only forge a connection with someone else, but we also reaffirm to ourselves that we have value to bring to the world. The value that God sees in us, but which we can easily lose. And that's important, because when we struggle with loneliness for a long period of time, it erodes our sense of self-esteem and self-worth. We begin to think we're lonely because we're not likable. We forget that we are, as 1 Peter describes us, chosen and precious. But serving others resets that program. It rejects the insidious voice telling us that we're dull and dusty, kicked to the side of the road. And it affirms our role as a living stone, connected to others and ourselves. We can find this guidance expressed in the mission of Walton, to be a place to learn, a place to serve, and a place to belong. Our mission, the essence of Walton as church, is how we answer God's call to be living stones, how we build community for all to belong, and how we nurture and sustain ourselves and others by doing so. Together, each one of us has a part we can play in building God's spiritual house, in forming and strengthening the community that is Walton, and in forming and strengthening the love of God in our hearts. We can do this just by talking to someone new over coffee, or by sharing a laugh and some advice with someone on our Spruce Up Day next weekend, or by inviting a mother figure in your life to join our Mother's Day tea next Sunday. This is how we celebrate and affirm that God sees us as chosen and precious, that God finds us in our darkness and leads us into his marvelous light, that God cares for us and loves us and wants us to be whole. Once you were no people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. when we give ourselves to God, we can see how much God gives to us. When we let God shine upon us and through us, we can proclaim the strength of his steadfast love. Living stones, grounded and growing, abiding in God's love. Praise be to God.